Black Politics Today. An eye for what's at stake in global politics and your source for the social, economic, and political impact of public policy on the African American community. Your host, Kelly Michael Williams, is a political strategy veteran with an undefeated campaign record and the political experience that spans nearly 3 decades, from Mayor Willie Brown in California to President Barack Obama in our nation's capital. So get ready for a fresh and honest approach on the politics that affect you and your family the most. Now, your host, Kelly Michael Williams.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Kelly Michael Williams, and thank you for joining us for What's at Stake right here on Black Politics Today broadcast. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. So often, we talk about, what's happening, what's going on, where it is and where it's happening. And we always find folks around the country that help us explain and express that and talk about that in various areas of life and various topics and subject matters and things of that nature. But before we get into that tonight, I want to first give condolences to the General Powell's family. General Powell was the first African American to lead the Joint Chiefs and get out there. Also, the first African American to lead the State Department. And so dying today, I think he's 84, of complications from COVID and cancer. Family says that he was fully vaccinated. So we have to take them for their word at that and understand that even if you're fully vaccinated, doesn't mean you won't necessarily get it. But the idea is that it's supposed to keep you at the hospital and keep you from passing away, keep you from dying. Unfortunately, in this case, because of, I believe, the cancer he had, that may have contributed to the result that we find ourselves dealing with today, which is his passing and death. My sister, my oldest sister, passed away of cancer very young, and it's one of those things that you can go into remission with, but she was taking a lot of pills and a lot of medication. So I'm thinking that because of those pills and medication, or because of those things that needed to be done for him, the vaccination, even though he may have had it, probably, with his immune system and things of that nature being weakened by the cancer drugs, succumbed to the virus. Now, if he was not vaccinated, then of course, there's nothing that we can talk about or say about that. That's just, we all know the data is clear. What happens if you're vaccinated compared to if you're not vaccinated? I think it's less than 1% of people who have been fully vaccinated that may contract this Delta variant may pass away. It's a very small percentage, but then again, nothing is absolute, nothing is perfect except God. So a plug for Jesus. If you don't know him, get to know him. Save your soul, save yourself, so that no matter when you go, at least you know where you're going with that. So certainly I want to give my condolences to the family. I think General Powell was probably one of the individuals that you can clearly say, regardless of his party, he wasn't partisan. I never saw him publicly being partisan to a great extent, I will say. I mean, we can always go back to the Iraq and Bush putting him on the spot to say that everything, that there's weapons of mass destruction and things of that nature. But to the extent of him, being a hardline partisan or hardline Republican, I never really saw that part of it, especially given the fact that he endorsed Obama twice, and I think he even endorsed Biden, because he certainly didn't want Trump up in there or around there. He may have even endorsed Clinton. I don't remember. I don't recall. Um, but the man, will be honored, I'm sure, by the military, the State Department, and the White House, and others, and will certainly his counsel was sought after by five presidents. So he was a giant in his arena and in the area of national security in terms of providing the expertise and understanding of what it was that he was called to do. So we want to certainly give our gratitude and support to him and his family, and look to what else is going on across the country. In Georgia, the jury selection has started for the trial of Ahmad Arbari. Many of you will probably remember Ahmad. He was the young brother, I think he's 25 years old, who was out jogging through the neighborhood and had done so, numerous times before because it was a neighborhood adjacent to his own, um, and was out jogging on a Sunday or Saturday afternoon. Um, and three individuals, two former law enforcement officers, and somebody else following in the truck, videotaping it all happened to be white. Um, had been out and complaining and calling 911 saying that this kid is breaking into houses that are under construction. So he's breaking into open houses, not stealing anything, not taking anything, but these houses have no doors, they have no walls, they have no windows, they have nothing preventing you from walking in and out of the house. They have cameras in the house, so there's video surveillance of him walking into the property under construction and looking around and walking out, leaving, and continuing to jog. And these former police officers uh, call this in repeatedly, and then get in their cars, their trucks, and go chase him down, and end up shooting him, I think, two or three times, and ultimately him dying. They rendered no assistance, no aid to him, and then proclaimed to say that he attacked them and it was self defense while they were chasing him down and looking for him. And so that trial begins later this week or next week, depending on when they complete jury selection. And that brings me to my guest tonight. My guest tonight is Dr. Martha Bireda. Dr. Bireda is the director of the Blanchard House Museum of African American History and Culture, which is located in Punta Gorda, Florida. And I hope I pronounced that right. For over 30 years, Dr. Bireda has consulted, lectured, written about, and provided assistance to school districts, law enforcement agencies, and corporations concerning issues relating to race, gender, class, culture, and power. She has written books related to racial disparity and disciplines of personal empowerment, as well as historical fiction. She is a contributor to the Wall Street International magazine, and you can find her material at wsimag.org. You can go there, I believe, every month. I believe she prints an article there, or pins an article there each month for the Wall Street International magazine, a version of, or a subsidiary of the Wall Street Journal. Most importantly, Dr. Bireda is a Florida humanities scholar, a historical reenactor, and public speaker. She is committed to using her skills to bring about racial healing and racial harmony in our nation. And I want to thank her for coming with us tonight. Her book that she has authored, one of them at least, is entitled "A Time for Change: How White Supremacy Ideology Ideology Harms All Americans." And I'll try that again. A Time for Change: How White Supremacy Ideology harms all Americans. And tonight we want to welcome Dr. Bireda to the broadcast. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Michael, thank you so very much for having me. I really appreciate your having me on the show.
It's my pleasure. It is my pleasure to have you. It's a long time overdue. We've been trying to do this for a couple of years now.
Yes.
So finally we can come and bring it together and see what we can do and see how we can bring some enlightenment to those who are listening, watching on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as those listening on Blog Talk Radio and Black Politics Today. So thank you for coming out. Talk to me about this book. I kind of, got tongue-tied with it in the beginning, but what motivated you to write this book, and tell me, what is it about?
Okay. First of all, I guess my motivation was, let me say this. I grew up during the Jim Crow period. And there started to be a feeling very much like that feeling. And what I'm talking about is overt racism, the kinds of things that I heard and saw when I was growing up. And one of those had to do with especially Blacks being in your place, not sleeping in the lobby of the student, in your dormitory, not being on the beach. And like you were talking about Arbari, he was out of his place, not being in your place. So that really started me to thinking about, this feels a little bit familiar. And it was disturbing to have that feeling because I knew what that feeling was about. I had actually written a book, basically this book, and had sent it to my editor, and then George Floyd was killed. And when George Floyd was killed, I really started to look at what was happening in this nation as very similar to the coronavirus. And in my book, I compare the two. One is a biological virus, and one is a sociological virus. They both do the very same thing. And so what I think my intentions when I wrote this book was that it would be a vaccine. Okay. A vaccine, I know there's a lot of talk about vaccines, pro and con right now, but a vaccine, the point is to reduce the transmission of a virus. And so I consider this book a vaccine, and I consider in the terms of the sociological virus, truth-telling is our vaccine. So why did I write this book and what is it about? I needed to know how America became obsessed with race. That's the fundamental question that's asked and answered in this book. A Time for Change covers several areas. One, that we are not taught in our school books. Hopefully we'll talk about this. We started out as a class-based society. We weren't started by folks who were not aristocrats. Aristocrats were accustomed to a class-based society in Europe. And so the very early colony was a class-based society. So how do we get to this point where we became a race-based society? Through the construction of a social construction of whiteness. When whiteness was created, then we got racism. And the white supremacist ideology has been infused and reinforced and perpetuated in the collective American mind and culture. And guess what? Through the utilization of stereotypical images of Blacks. For over 300 years, the American mind, especially the American white mind, has been indoctrinated with the stereotypical images of African Americans. And those images were rationalized to present African Americans as culturally inferior, intellectually inferior. And now what we're seeing most, what has survived since emancipation, is morally inferior. So this book, really the purpose is that I wanted to explore the ideology of white supremacy and the damage that it's done. Now,
Well, let me
many,
ask you a question, because you talked about the um, I'm gonna use the word the origination of whiteness.
Mhm.
So talk to us about that, because many may know, and many probably don't know that whiteness wasn't, that wasn't a term or culture or a characteristic before a certain period of time. Talk to us about that and how whiteness, as it is become known, of course, today, arrived.
All right. On the page number 1 of my book, I'm going to read you something. When the first Africans, I'm talking about 1619, when the first Africans reached the shores of the Virginia colony, there were no white people here. The settlers, and sometimes when I read that, people say, what? There were no white people here? No, white was not a construction. When the settlers that who were here were designated as either English, Christian, or from their nationality. So there were really 3 groups of people when the Africans arrived. And by the way, there were Africans in America before 1619. Okay, that's another discussion, Michael.
Okay,
There were 3
we'll call
groups
you
of
back for that
people: the land-holding aristocrats, a small yeoman class, and a large, check this out, peasant class consisting of involuntarily, that's the key, involuntarily indentured European servants and slaves. And there were European slaves. Okay? So, what happens here? Now, we're in Virginia, and that's the way it was. Now, we don't learn this in our textbook, Michael, but the social reality of Virginia at that time,
one. Hmm.
uh, there's a fantasy around that. I guess everybody probably thinks they came on the Mayflower at the top of the Mayflower, deck 1. That's not true at all. During the time that the Virginia colony was established, England was having horrible social problems. There was crime,
Hmm.
there was poverty, there was homelessness. And what our textbooks have now told us is that the British colonies, became dumping grounds for the inferiors that they did not want in Britain. You take a look at any of the islands. And so they brought these people over. And when you read the book, what you will see, and very interesting, none of us have been taught this. We've only been taught about the Middle Passage. Now, Michael, I am not in any way taking away from the awfulness of the Middle Passage. But what I want to say is, for those people who may be designated as white, who may not know this history, is that the involuntary indentured servants that came, most of them were involuntary, came in the hulls of ships. Many of them died before they got here. Same kinds of things that happened to Africans happened to them. They landed, people bought them, their servers or them. And there are authors who talk about the enslavement of these people. So what we've got here, we've got this large group of Europeans. And one of the things to get some of them on the boat was that when you go to the colony and you're going to be able to make money and blah blah blah, the whole story. Okay,
Hmm.
they get here, and again, and Michael, if you want to know what happens, you have to look at primary records and you have to look at Virginia records. And luckily, I guess, my father was Virginian. And so I have this connection to Virginia. And so I am very fascinated by early Virginia because I find Virginians to be very fascinating people, including my father. And
So let
so,
me so let me ask you this thing, because I mean you're breaking down some history that I'm certain and sure that um, a lot of people don't know and don't recognize, because as you mentioned, as you started, history talks about the African slaves. History talks about those of our ancestors that were brought over here unwillingly, and ceremoniously, and
Mhm.
we were just, rounded up in Africa and brought over here. But you're talking about also the indentured, involuntary indentured servants that came from Europe that were here as well, who were white.
Mhm.
Um, there's very little historical dialogue or discussion about any, you know, white indentured servants or people of that nature who wanted to, that were in America as slaves.
Mhm.
We know about the 1619. We know about our black slaves.
Mhm.
So you're talking preceding 1619, what was out there and who was there.
Okay. I have to ask the question, and probably all of us should ask the question, why were we not taught about the conditions of indentured servants? You see, if that was taught in history, then that refutes the whole idea of white supremacy. How could people of white skin been treated like that and been indentured and enslaved? Okay, so that brings back that whole thing. What happened, Michael, is that, and many people don't know this. First of all, you know, Africans weren't just any African wasn't rounded up. Okay, let's get that clear, first of all. Africans who had the skills that were needed in the colonies were the ones who were brought over. Let's be very clear about that. In Virginia, it was tobacco. And so what they did, they found Africans who were accustomed to growing tobacco. It's like in the Sea Islands, they didn't pick up any African walking around. They picked up Africans who knew about rice cultivation. So that whole thought, that culturally inferior. See, we aren't taught about who was chosen to come to America.
Hmm.
Africans who were brought here had skills all the way from iron making to growing rice. Okay. So, anyways, we get here and we've got these Europeans who are really treated horribly. Okay. We have some Africans here. Now, let me say this and make this very, very clear. Every African who was here was not enslaved. There were Africans who were able to take advantage of what the London Company did. If you could pay for someone to come over as an indentured, you got 50 acres of land. There were Africans who were able to take advantage of this. Believe it or not, Michael, look at Virginia. You have to go to look at Virginia records. Africans were part of the higher social class, many of them. You look at Virginia records, and when the whiteness came into place, you can go year by year and see how their rights were taken from them. There were Africans who had indentured servants and possibly slaves who were very wealthy, who were part of the upper social class. That is never taught us. Okay?
Hmm.
So what we've got here, we got a real problem going on here. We got at this time, we got 15,000 people over here. Between 7 and 9,000 of them are Europeans. Okay? I'm not talking about aristocrats. I'm talking about the peasant class. They start to get very angry, as naturally they should, because of the way that they're treated. In the book, I talk about the way they're treated. It's very similar. It was the way that they were treated was the model that they used for Africans when the Africans became enslaved. So this is what happened. They started to rebel, and there were Africans here. There's some were slaves, and we had this multiracial rebellion. We had several of them. But the greatest one was Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. Multiracial. You had all of these unhappy people. You had these yeoman farmers. You had all these folks who the elite class was keeping out of the business. You see, they couldn't let all these Europeans get into growing tobacco because what would happen to the tobacco prices? So they kept them under control. They couldn't vote. They had to ask to marry. The same rules that Africans have where to whites they had. Okay, so we've got the majority of the people who are here are the common whites, as they called them, the indentured class. They weren't whites then, they were Europeans. They figured out, the upper class, that it really was a better investment to go and bring, even though it might be more costly at first, but to bring Africans and enslave them for eternity than to deal with this indentured class that after 7 years or so would want some land and some money and to be free. So after this Bacon's Rebellion, the elite class became very anxious. What they could not have, because they're getting ready to bring more Africans in, they're going to bring more enslaved people in. Right now, when this happened, when whiteness was created, there were more Europeans here than Africans. It was not created because of Africans. It was created to control the minds of the white, of the common Europeans. That's why whiteness was created. Okay? Wasn't about Africans.
So
It came
it's
to
always
be
been
about
about,
Africans.
right.
Huh?
It's always been about the money and the power.
Yes, it has. And so that's what many people who are designated as white do not understand. Okay? So one of the things that had to happen here, they had to make sure that they had a buffer class, because if we get more Africans, they're not going to be happy being enslaved. We get all these unhappy yeoman whites. So they had to figure out, and what they figured out was brilliant, was whiteness. Basing your class or who you were, and I call it place, your place on the social hierarchy, they
Mhm.
based it on skin color. Now, Michael, don't forget, it was based on social class prior. And let me say this, the pandemic has shown us, and especially in the last 40 years, with the whole Rust Belt and everything, the social class, the class hierarchy, it still remains. Many people don't understand that. The race hierarchy they put in, what they did, believe it or not, for almost 50 years, the Europeans, especially the Irish and the Africans, they lived together, they married, they had children, worked together, and rebelled together. Okay? So what they had to do was, with the newly whites, they had to figure out, okay,
I see you,
what can,
caller. We'll be with you in just a moment. Go ahead,
huh?
Martha. I'm
So,
just
so
letting the caller know I see them.
okay. So what they had to do, you the newly whites were in the same, almost the same material condition, okay, economic condition, still could vote, all those kinds of things, but they had to give them an incentive. And so what they gave them was to be at the top of the racial hierarchy, that you are no longer an inferior. Now, if you look at Europe for centuries, they always had an inferior class. And so intergenerationally, there were inferior classes of Europeans. So here we go. We give this group of indentured servants, we put you at the top of the hierarchy. Psychologically, can you imagine what that did for them? They were inferiors and they become superiors. Okay.
Right.
So what they did initially, you know, gave them separate housing, gave them better food, gave them better clothing, cut out that interracial marriage. And that's when they put all those laws in about miscegenation. Went to the churches, and finally, they started to make laws. And Christians ended up being, if you were black, you're African, you couldn't be a Christian. They had all these little rules that they made. So they gave this group of people, and for 300 years, through using the stereotypical images of blacks, using those three categories of inferiority, they have indoctrinated the collective American mind. And I say primarily the collective white mind, because it's very interesting about some things. I was doing a program with the group, and they were asking me about Aunt Jemima, and the indoctrination of these stereotypical images was for the white mind. You see, if every black believed they were inferior, we wouldn't have had the Harlem Renaissance. we wouldn't have had the civil rights movement. And so when I was asked about Aunt Jemima, well, one of the reasons they used Aunt Jemima and advertising was a way to really ingrain this image of the servile Black was one of the things that the manufacturer said for the poor Southern white woman who can't afford a Black maid. She can have a Black maid make her pancakes. Well, I ate Aunt Jemima. It never occurred to me to be a maid for anybody. And so that indoctrination was basically for whites, okay? But Michael, when you talk about what hurts America, that indoctrination is still with us because, as I've said, that whole thing of place is coming back. You're in you're not in your place. The killings, all of that, that's part of the Jim Crow. And the Jim Crow period was when this thing was really, really put into stone.
Well, Jim Crow was the. I'm going to see if we have a question here from a caller. Then I'm going to get back to you with the questions about how you move forward in your book about the impact on the country. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hi. Yeah, my name's Joe. I'm a libertarian, and I saw the title of your show, and so I thought I'd jump on in. I didn't know you had a guest. I don't want to interrupt the interview, but I'd like to know if either one of you would like to engage in a debate that I could sponsor either on your show, the show I go to, or anybody else's show. So would either one of you be interested in that?
Well, what's the debate about?
It'll be about one of three topics, either the vaccines, immigration, or racism. So what I want to do, as a liberal versus a conservative, I'll be the moderator, and I'll be moderating like the Supreme Court does. I'll be interrupting people to make sure that they don't meander and just talk. We'll just get straight down to the nitty-gritty. And it'll be based upon documents that people will have. For example, if you wanted to be one of the debaters, then you would have documents, and the same documents that your opponent would have. That way, you could actually refer back to the documents. It won't be based upon strictly subjective opinions. It'll be based upon some sort of documentation. So that's why I'm here. I already have one volunteer as a conservative. I talked to another person as a conservative, and I'm trying to round out some liberals who might be interested. So would either one of you be interested in a debate?
So you're assuming we're liberals?
I was going to say the same thing, Michael. I was going to say the very same thing. I'm just into truth telling, sir.
Or libertarians, then you can volunteer for the other side. So,
well, why don't we do
this? Are you liberals, conservatives, or libertarians?
Let me do this. I'm going to give you my email address, and then I'm going to have you email us after the broadcast, and then we can.
I don't do that.
We can discuss that.
I don't do that.
You don't do what?
I don't send out emails. I don't receive emails.
Oh.
If you like to volunteer, I can come back. I'm on your show again, let you know when the setup is going to be. I don't give out my email or phone numbers to people on the internet.
Well, see, I was going to give you my email, and then you could respond to me. I'm not going to interrupt my show to deal with you and answer your questions. I'm going to deal with my guest because she's a guest, and I'm going to give her courtesy. But I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. So that's why I was going to give you my email, and then we can take this offline and discuss it and try to find out if the doctor is available or myself.
Okay, what I'll do, I'll call back another time. Because again, if you give me your email, I have to respond, and then that'll be giving you my email. I don't do that.
Just make up an email, man.
Number or my email.
Just make up an email, a Gmail, a Yahoo, a Hotmail, or whatever, and just respond, and then we can dialogue. I mean, you don't have to give me your personal email. You can make one up. They're free.
Or just talk by phone.
Yeah. Available now.
All right. So
okay.
So
and I don't want to interrupt your interview.
Right.
So I'll come back and we'll discuss it again. Okay.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks for listening.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Doctor, but hey, you know what? I thank him. We get it all the time. That's great. So we'll discuss whether or not we can do that. He comes back on the
Okay.
broadcast and we can listen and
Okay.
see what he's got to say. What have
Okay.
you.
Yeah,
So
I
here's a comment from one of our
I
viewers
see
here.
that.
She wants to know why didn't those Africans or those who were empowered stop slavery or stop the enslavement of what was going on.
First of all, there you looked at the figures I gave you. 7 to 9,000 were Europeans, and the ruling class, those African Americans, basically. Let me tell you what happened to them. The ones in Virginia who were doing quite well, their families, the Johnson families, people were doing very well. They ended up actually, because of the laws that were placed upon them, they had to end up leaving the state, and so they left. There weren't enough of them. They did not have the power. We're talking about the powerful aristocrats. We're talking about the people who came to rule our government and whatnot. And so those few blacks that were there who had that power had to actually leave.
Right. Now
And
you mentioned and you talked about and you kind of touched on it, but I want to give you a minute or two to get into the nitty gritty of the social reality that you talk about in the early Virginia colony. What was the social reality that's happening and that happened there during this time?
okay, the social reality is what I said was not the mythical thing that we talk about. It was the ruling class
Right.
and laborers.
Right.
That was there. There were few yeomen, uh, poor farmers trying to make it. But then, when they had the rebellion, they joined the Africans and the indentured in the rebellion. So in the
Similar
colony,
to what they did during uh, um, I'm trying. Well, I mean, just during the civil rights movement. I mean, without white America during the civil rights movement and pushing and moving and many of those who were creating and starting the civil rights movement, just like we had with Black Lives Matter
mhm,
movement, a lot of it pushed and moved forward because whites got involved and participated in it and
mhm,
moved and helped move that agenda along because of the fact of those who were in power and who were in charge.
mhm, mhm. So, this is about power. And okay, the two things that they did not ever want to happen again. And Michael, unfortunately, in 300 years, it has not happened. They did not want the common whites to ever come to class consciousness. See, because they and the blacks and the Indians, everybody was in the same class. They did not want that. And they said never did they want a multiracial alliance again. And except for few instances, maybe the populist movement at some point in time, there was a movement in Chicago in the 1960s, the Young Patriots, Fred Hampton, the Young Patriots, which were
Yeah.
basically hillbillies who, got with him, and the Latin Lords, and those three groups understanding about class consciousness versus racial consciousness. They got together and made some changes. However, the ruling class, first of all, took care of Fred Hampton, okay? And then they went after those folks and they ended up scattering. But from what I'm hearing, there are new people, some of the older people on that group are coming to the knowledge. What the pandemic did, Michael, and actually it didn't just start with the pandemic, about 40 years ago, when we got into globalization and when all of these factories closed and whatever. And one of the things that I say is, there were jobs that were white jobs. Like your whole family could go and work in a factory. A black couldn't get a job there, but your grandfather, your father, you were assured of a job. Then comes uh, money and factories going overseas. So you took jobs from superior whites, right? and gave them to inferior yellows and browns.
Right.
Okay. And so what I talk about in the book is the limitation of whiteness. And we saw that, I talk about it right before the Civil War. If you owned 20 slaves, you didn't have to go to war. And, you could send somebody else. You could continue to grow your cotton. Poor white farmers had to grow food for the troops. And so one of the things that they did, they always, anytime there were anytime these conditions came up where there might be class consciousness, the ruling class brought up race. And so they told these poor whites in the South who gained absolutely nothing from slavery. They had free labor. Why were they going to hire them? They gained nothing from slavery. And in order to get them to fight, what they said was a rich man's war, a poor man's fight, they told them two things. And let's go back to place on the racial hierarchy and think what it does to your psyche. They told them, if you don't fight with us to preserve slavery, blacks will be your social equals. And just think about that. A black would be your social equal, and you get out there and fight for the ruling class like you and him had something in common. Then they said blacks will compete with you for jobs. They always bring up race. And so that, I saw it. It's happening. Not right now. We're talking more about immigrants, but I think all of us know that if you're not Native American or Pacific Islander, that everybody's an immigrant. Some of us came, involuntarily, but immigrants. There are only a few left of a few real Americans. Everybody else is an immigrant. So really, it's more on immigrants.
You can't tell people that, though. People don't receive that.
So what now?
I said you can't tell people that. They don't receive that. They think
that we're immigrants. Everybody else is an immigrant.
They don't believe that. They only believe that people come from the southern border as an immigrant.
Oh no, honey. Well, let me say this. Let me say proudly, Michael, and probably you got
no. Well, I hear what you're saying, Doctor.
On both of my sides of my family, I got some roots in America because I got Native American. I got Cherokee in me.
Right.
So I am an American.
You can look at you and tell that. Okay.
Well, I'm an American, and you probably American too.
We can look at you and tell that.
Well,
but what I'm saying is, people only think of immigrants as those coming from the southern border. They don't think about what you just said. They don't realize that everyone who came here was an immigrant. They don't do it. They don't realize it. And I agree with you, because the argument and the fight for the fact that we want to get rid of them, but you migrated here yourself. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. What did I say about the early colonies? Between 7,000 and 9,000 were indentured, were peasant class.
Right.
They were immigrants. So the beginning of the Americans were basically immigrants, people who came from that class, though. Now keep that in mind. The elite class is a very small class. Okay. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
So I understand what you're saying. Those Browns, I guess they're rapists and murderers and drug dealers and the same stereotypes that have been placed upon blacks. And in fact, Michael, I just finished another book. It's called The Promise of Whiteness. And one of the things that I talk about are the new demographics. And I, as a writer and as a cognitive behaviorist, I'm very interested to see if they're going to throw how many of those stereotypes that were used on blacks are going to be used on those brown immigrants and those yellow immigrants. It's going to be very interesting to see what is done in the American mind to indoctrinate them into this whole white supremacy thing.
Well, let me ask you this, because with right now what's going on now with and we got a few moments left. The critical race theory.
Okay.
The whole idea behind this critical race theory is that white parents don't want racial issues or slavery or the Holocaust or other things being taught because they don't want their children growing up feeling guilty about what their ancestors did, or something of that nature, some type of theory of we're teaching racism in school, we're teaching hate in school, which the fact of the matter that critical race theory is a legal
Mhm.
theory, not a not anything that's been taught in any elementary school, any junior high school, or any high school. It's not even being taught in college, except in law school.
Mhm.
But the fact that they're out, the fact that people are out there fighting this and deal with this, is there some relationship to what you have, to your book and to your theory, to that same theory of why they're trying to stop critical race theory allegedly from being taught?
Okay. They are using critical race theory, and my daughter, I proudly say, is a Harvard trained lawyer, and they taught that, and she didn't take it, but it's a law school course. Okay. So I even had to go to my daughter. I said, tell me, because Michael, you gave my biography, and I've done 30 years of doing cultural competency. I didn't know I was doing cultural race theory. I was just trying to make teachers and policemen sensitive to other people of other cultures. But this is all gaslighting. Let me say this. What's happening is that we've come to a point where we need to teach true American history. Actually, I want to do a course, hopefully an online course. Somebody who did an article about our museum opening, the title of his article was Healing Through History. I would like to do a course online on healing through history. How? Because I think if we can acknowledge the myths, we can get to the belief system that encourage some of the things that they don't want to talk about. But this is all nonsense. I saw the fact that the story of little Ruby, what's the little Ruby Bridges, the one who integrated New Orleans. The fact
Oh,
that you cannot tell that child's story because everybody's going to hate white people, and that's nonsense. So, Michael, all this is about really is a fear of
yeah.
having the truth of American history told. And I am determined. Please read my WSI articles. I have one, it'll come out the 26th of every month. I have one that's coming out in a few days. And I'm going to tell you, for the next few months, Martha Bireda is only going to be writing about telling true history. It's about fear. And the article is about courage and cowardice. You see, when you can't tell your history, you are truly a coward. And so this is, they're using CRT as a means. I saw something about Tennessee. You can't teach Black history? Come on, people.
Yeah.
You can't teach history, American history, unless you include African Americans.
So the
And
question comes: what history are they going to teach? What are they going to say? Because
okay, okay.
as it's been coined, it's revisionist history. So what are they going to teach these kids? Or are they going to take history completely out of the school so they don't have to do it, and create something else for them to have to be tested on to
Mhm.
meet the standards that the Department of Education puts out there?
Well, they've been teaching a history that has omissions and distortions in it.
Well,
That's
yeah.
all the history that we've learned. And so I guess you saw the Holocaust thing, that if you
Yeah.
have to give the opposing view. So I guess that the history, if they teach history at all, there'll be slavery and why it was good. And slavery is bad, but why it was good. In fact, probably my next article is going to be about the opposing views. But no, really, really,
Like the opposing
I'm
view
fascinated by the
of the
opposing
Holocaust,
views.
the opposing view of the Holocaust. Well, we have to have someone come up here and talk about that.
No,
Yeah.
really, I
Okay.
am going to
Great.
write
Great.
my next article is going to be on the opposing views, because I have to look at the beliefs and the things that people say that, yeah, okay, yeah, we did it and this thing was good. But it's this whole thing. That's the one thing that right now we cannot let happen. Parents,
Yes.
I know there are some parents who don't want the history taught, and it's absolutely ridiculous. We taught the history of the westward movement, and we know about all the Indians that were killed and whatnot, and little white children in globe come up hating cowboys. Okay, do they hate cowboys? They killed Indians. All right, this is all nonsense. What they don't want is to what happened in Germany. I happened a couple of years ago to be in Germany and talked to some young people, and it was our movement here in the 60s. Our Black students who were in the movement actually were an incentive for young Germans to say to their parents and grandparents, we got to clear this thing up. In Germany, they teach history. They have signs that show where an atrocity was committed. But what it did for them, it freed them
Right. I
from
can
that.
imagine.
It freed them. But their youth were the ones who had to do it. But I have to give the German people had the courage to face their history, to acknowledge it. And Michael, that is the only way you can heal, is that you acknowledge your history, you face your history, you understand why you have this history. You see, young people need to understand why this history occurred. They have to become critical thinkers. And that's what this whole movement does not want to happen. They don't want our children to think critically anymore. They don't want them to question. They want them to stay right in that indoctrinated mind that they have mindset. That is not good for America. It hurts everybody. And like I said, as the pandemic came along, individuals who you psychologically say, well, I'm better than who. When you don't have health care, honey, when you don't have any food,
Right.
when you're in a food line, whiteness means nothing.
Yeah.
It hurts everybody. And for 300 years, they've been able to convince common, that's what they call it, not Martha's term, their term, common white people, not to believe in class consciousness, not to look at people who are in the same class, and not to align with people in the same class, as long as they can keep what James Baldwin says. James Baldwin said something about freedom. Let me find this page for you. I'll be through in 1 minute here. James Baldwin said this: it is time for white people to release themselves from their own captivity. You see, whiteness, what it did was to control black bodies, but it controls white minds. It hurts everybody.
So let me ask you this: what is your feeling, or what is your recommendation um, to how we deal with the racial healing that is needed in America? How do we get started? What is it that we need to do? I mean, you essentially alluded to it right there with saying, yeah, whites need to essentially forgive themselves for the atrocities and what they have done to other races in America. But short of that, and the reality of that ever coming to pass, what is it that you recommend, or what is it that needs to happen to start the process for racial healing in America?
Accurate history. Accurate history. We need to acknowledge the myth of white superiority and black inferiority and brown inferiority. We need to challenge those. We need to refute those myths. But we need that, and I believe in belief system change and cognitive behaviors. We have to look at our history and look at the beliefs that brought us to that history. We have to confront, we have to challenge and refute those beliefs so that we can be on the same page as Americans. Those beliefs have kept us, all of us, imprisoned much too long. So the first thing that I would say to anybody, if you've got a child in school, you demand that accurate history, the total history, be told, so that your child can develop critical thinking skills so that they can make their own judgments. That's what we have to do, is teach accurate American history and to challenge the mythology that has been taught to Americans, put in the collective American mind for over 300 years. Until we do that, we are going to be in trouble as a nation.
The book is called A Time for Change, How White Supremacy Ideology Harms All Americans. Dr. Bireda, what's at stake for us? What's at stake for America? And most importantly, what's at stake for Black America?
One of the things, first of all, we're not going to be able to continue with the conflicts that we're having, okay? Right now, the pandemic just showed the inequality in America. So either we fix this or the inequality gets worse. And what happens with inequality is real conflict, okay? Now, with African Americans, I think I just read something that I have to tell you, Michael. I'm going to write about this too. That's very disturbing to me. I had two African American children who were in gifted classes, and I have a grandson who lives right there in DC who I am sure is gifted. You know, I was a speech pathologist. I used to give those tests. But I understand that and I read in the newspaper, like in New York, they're doing away with gifted and talented classes. That's not the way that you do this. It's through doing what's necessary so that African American and Latino children get into gifted classes. You don't do away with them. You get rid of these. Here I go back to my myths. You get rid of the myths that Black children can't learn. You get rid of the myths that they can't be taught, and you will have them going into gifted. You don't have to do away with gifted programs. So for Black people, one of the things for us, Michael, is not to get caught in victimology. We cannot get caught in victimology. I look at, in the new book, I talk about Tulsa. And Tulsa, the thing that happened with them, they got too high for their place, for one thing. They weren't victims. And so what I can say for African Americans at this point, look at our victories. Do not let your child ever believe he or she is a victim.
Right.
Now that, Michael, is very important for our children. They cannot grow up believing that they're victims and there's nothing they can do about it, because they can do something about it. They're bright. They can look at their gifts and their talents, and they can do what they need to do.
Well, Dr. Bireda, I want to thank you for joining us tonight and sharing with us the understanding the myths of our history, the reality of our history, and some history that many of us may not have known. Some of us may have, and then some reality to those to that history as well. Talk to us about, maybe you can give how people can reach out to you and contact you via email or Twitter or Facebook, and what exactly how they can follow you and make sure they can subscribe to your writings, and that way they can make sure they can.
Well, Michael, they can have you can put my email up. They can have my email. I'm afraid of that. People know where you are anyway if you have a cell phone. And secondly, wsimag.org. No, .com. I have an article in there.
You're right, .org. I think you put .org in there. I'm not sure if it's .org or .com, but I believe you gave me .org.
Okay, and so I have one, and I'm gonna tell you right now, for the next 5 or 6 months, all Martha's gonna be talking about is teaching correct history, and so that's just where I am right now.
That's what we need.
We have to teach.
That's what we
need. We have to teach the history. We absolutely have to teach the history. So that's kind of where I am right now, is making sure that we learn that we can't be afraid of it. We have to deal with it.
Yeah. We do.
Well, I had some little thing in my head, and I'm getting old. I forgot I wanted to tell you, but I can't remember what it was. it had to do with
Well, reach
so
out to me. Certainly, if you don't remember between now and me closing out the broadcast, just chime in. But certainly, reach out to us. Let us know when you finish your next book. Please let me know. We invite you back on again so that you can share the tidbits and insights to that book as well, and give us some more history. Certainly, if you're in Florida, I would recommend and suggest that you get down to her museum uh,
yes.
there in Florida and participate and know that, hey, that she's doing a wonder down there in Florida with the it's the oh, give me the name of that
Blanchard, you go to
Blanchard.
blanchardhousemuseum.org.
Yes, the
And
Blanchard
we,
House
we
Museum.
had to close for 19 months, but we have still have exhibits up there, and we've got a very interesting one up. The African, it talks about some of the African roots of American healthcare. And by the way, for folks who don't want to take a vaccination, probably because the first one was introduced by an African. He was an enslaved African, and he introduced the inoculation for smallpox. And so you have Africans to blame for those vaccinations. Okay, it was an African who introduced that. And so
Right. So get down to Florida, go to the museum, check her out on wsimag.org and or.com, but I believe it's .org, and read her publications each 26th of the month. She
yes,
publishes on the 26th of the month. And know that from now to the end of the year and beyond, it's going to be about history, baby. It's about history. So she's going to tell it like it is,
have
not
to
like it
do it.
is, and she's gonna make sure you understand it. All
Have
right.
to do it, Michael. Have to do it. Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
doctor.
much,
I
Michael.
appreciate you so much for
Michael,
coming on.
my comment about the inoculation, why was it politically incorrect, was it?
I don't think so. What about
Okay,
the
all right.
inoculation? About getting vaccinated?
No, I mean, some folks, if you want to go to mythology, it did come from, it came from where it came from.
Right.
So,
Right. So I mean, well, what I would say is to this is that I know that the Maduro vaccination was developed and designed by a young black woman, and I
mhm.
understand 5 African Americans worked on the Pfizer vaccine. I don't know anything about Johnson and Johnson, but I do know the woman Kizzy. I can't think of her last name. She was the primary researcher. She's 32 years old. She's the primary researcher for the Madeira vaccination, and she was the one that motivated me to get the Moderna vaccination. So that's why I got Moderna, because I was not aware of the 5 other individuals that worked on Pfizer. Now, she was not the only one that worked on Moderna, but she was the lead scientist. What they call their um, I can't think of the word that they're called, that do the scientific studies of how to put the vaccinations together. But she was the lead, and then she had 2 or 3 others supporting her, along with a number of other folks. But
Mhm.
they were the motivations for me to get the vaccination, because knowing and seeing how many African Americans were dying from COVID, and knowing and seeing that if it wasn't safe and if it wasn't real, we would be the only ones taking it or getting it. But knowing that they had opened it up for everyone and that everyone was taking it, that's when I realized and knew that it wasn't a Tuskegee issue,
Mhm.
it was a death issue.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
went on and jumped in and made sure I got it and got my family vaccinated, because my mother's 82, just
Mhm.
turned 82 last week, has Alzheimer's, dementia, has COPD, has other
Mhm.
complications.
She needs to.
Uh, I want to keep her around as long as I can,
Mhm.
but at the same time, I have asthma, and I want to make sure that we don't have any issues. So I took it, got it, and hey, like you said, we are bright, we are educated, we understand, we know we're not inferior to anyone or any race, and we need to recognize and teach our kids that, and we need to recognize that we are going to be a majority in this country. So we need to prepare ourselves for that and for that role, and not continue to think of ourselves as less than or inferior or anything else.
Thank
We
you.
have to recognize that we have to get out there, we have to buy up, own up, don't spend up, but
Mhm.
buy up, own up, and own our community. We don't need, we don't need gentrification to make our community better. We can gentrify our own communities, and we can make them better for ourselves. And we can recognize what culture means and what morals and values mean. Because even if you rent, you should be like my dad says. I don't care if you're sweeping a broom, be the best broom sweeper you can. If you're renting, be the best tenant you can, to where you can come to that man who or woman who owns that house and tell them you want to buy that house, because eventually they're going to sell that house. All right. And they're going to sell it to somebody who is prepared to buy it. So prepare yourself to do that. And that's my philosophy. Get up, get out, and do it. Don't keep sitting back asking who, what, when, or how, what ifs or how abouts or maybes. As I say, be a meaningful, specific, rather than a wandering generality. And with that, until next week, if it's social, economic, or political, it's Black Politics Today. And I want to thank Dr. Martha Bireda, for coming back on the show again. And certainly we look forward to seeing you again, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's so nice to be on your show and to see you again.
Thank you. I look forward to when you come back to DC.
All righty. Thank you.
All right. Everyone, don't sleep. Don't rest. Don't wait. It's time for you to step up and do your thing. I was listening to a sermon this past weekend, and I listen to sermons every weekend, go to church every Sunday. But I listened to a sermon this past weekend. I think it was Friday and Saturday. And the thing is this: you can do what you want to do. And we talk about being what you want to be. You can do that too. But more importantly, you got to believe that you can and that you will. And I'm actually speaking to myself right now, because a lot of times I'll get down, or I'll figure like, I can't do this, or I can't do that, or there's not the opportunity for me to do this, or I don't have the backing to do that. But something was said to me the other day. It was like, don't worry about getting everything lined up. Don't worry about getting everything in place before you move. Move now and watch what God will do for you.
Thank you.
I'm moving now because I'm expecting God to move. Until next week, if it's social, economic, or political, it's Black Politics Today. Thank you very much. See you then.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for listening to Black Politics Today, an eye for what's at stake in global politics, with your host, Kelly Michael Williams. Join us